President Biden even weighed in on the leak, calling the draft opinion a fundamental shift in how the nation has operated. Here's what he had to say about what it could mean for all of us going forward. Take a listen.
It basically says all the decisions related to your private life, who you marry, whether or not you decide to conceive a child or not, whether or not you can have an abortion, a range of other decisions, whether or not how you raise your child. What does this do? Does this mean that in Florida they can decide they're going to pass a law saying that same-sex marriage is not permissible? It's against the law in Florida?
The actual leak itself is kind of a big deal for a lot of reasons. Here's a look at a statement from the Supreme Court and the Chief Justice. Quote, yesterday a news organization published a copy of a draft opinion in a pending case. Justices circulate draft opinions internally as a routine and essential part of the court's confidential deliberative work. Although the document described in yesterday's report is authentic, it does not represent a decision by the court or the final position of any member on the issues in the case. Chief Justice John G. Roberts Jr. provided the following statement. To the extent this betrayal of the confidences of the court was unintended to undermine the integrity of our operations, it will not succeed. The work of the court will not be affected in any way. We at the court are blessed to have a workforce, permanent employees, and law clerks alike, intensely loyal to the institution and dedicated to the rule of law. Court employees have an exemplary and important tradition of respecting the confidentiality of the judicial process and upholding the trust of the court. This was a singular and egregious breach of that trust that is an affront to the court and the community of public servants who work here. I have directed the Marshal of the Court to launch an investigation into the source of the leak. Now, let's dive deeper into what this leak means, both for the law and for the court. So, joining us now is Rob Crain, attorney and legal expert. Welcome to the show, Rob. We'll start pretty general. What do you think is the biggest takeaway here so far from what you've just been hearing, watching, listening to all day today?
Well, you have two monumental events that have occurred within 24 hours, and they're simultaneous. The first is that you've got a leak of an unprecedented nature. Never in the history of our country have we had a draft opinion that has been leaked out to the media. The most closely aligned incident in the past was actually with Roe v. Wade, where there was a leak to the press as to some specific debate that was going on inside the court. But the second thing that you've got is you've got this monumental shift in our law that has been the law for most of us during our lifetimes. And it is a precedent that was set with a 7-2 opinion in Roe v. Wade. It was affirmed in the Casey opinion in 92 with a 5-4 opinion. And now you have a 5-4 potential opinion that will and move the issue to the states. So two major seismic events happening simultaneously.
All right, so we have some example of the last time, a document like this was leaked, but what about the latter that you mentioned there, the fact that the Supreme Court is going back on a previous ruling? That in itself, how rare is that?
It's very rare to have a precedent of this stature that has been now our law for 49 years to be completely taken down in the manner in which you all just described. The concept of stare decisis of precedent is that we want to have consistency in our laws, stability in our communities and throughout our society, that we know that some fundamental things will remain the same. Now, not as noted, every precedent should stand. Brown versus Board of Education, we knew that we needed to get rid of the concept in our country of separate but equal. But as far as this opinion goes, this will potentially change the dynamic of our country and the stability we've had in this issue with a 5-4 decision. And typically when you're having this kind of a cataclysmic event, changing this kind of precedent, you'd like to have more of a majority than that. Brown versus Education was a unanimous decision. Roe v. Wade was 7-2. So this, by its very nature, having a 5-4 opinion is going to somewhat of a cautious, well, it's going to be one that's going to cause some instability. Are we going to have a change in this opinion the next time a president realigns the court to a liberal majority? Are we going to go back and forth on this opinion? That's what we want to avoid with precedent. We don't want to have back and forth.
And real quick, how could this leak impact the legitimacy of the Supreme Court in public opinion?
Well, I heard the historian John Meacham speak earlier today, and he called this a crisis of trust. The Supreme Court, this is part of their operation. This is part of how they go about making the decisions about our law. We have an argument, we have a conference, we have an initial vote, we have an initial draft. And then the justices go back and forth with that draft, and oftentimes there are concurring opinions that result, dissenting opinions that result. Sometimes justices change their mind and join a dissent, or they actually even change the majority. And this part of the process is very important to the deliberative nature. So having this leak fundamentally undermines that portion of the process, and it brings all of what you're seeing on your show today, all of the protests, all of the commentary. Now that's going to weigh in and pressure the court one way or the other. It's going to provide some instability in that process. So we want our court to be able to maintain its confidentiality to do its job in this manner it's done for hundreds of years now.
Okay, see, yeah, you just touched on something really important that I wanted to ask you next, Mr. Crain. I was going to ask. We don't know who leaked this, how this document got out, and I wanted to kind of get a better idea of somebody's motivation for doing it. Is it to, if you're doing it anonymously, right, it's not for anything personal, right? You don't want to put your own name out there for obvious reasons. So is it to put pressure on the court? Is it to get, you know, the public kind of talking about this before it actually happens? What would be the motivation for somebody to leak something like this?
Well, and I think the first thing you said is the most important thing we need to take away. We do not know who leaked this. We do not know their motivation. The initial reaction is by most people to assume it's somebody who wanted to bring this to light in order to potentially pressure the court to revisit this, to show the public response to such a monumental decision in a way that might cause somebody to change their mind. Personally, I don't believe any of these justices are going to be swayed one way or the other by a leaking of their draft work. But that is a potential. Again, I think we all need to be very cautious about speculating here because we do not know yet who it is, though I'm confident the marshal of the court and the Supreme Court police will find out at some point.
Attorney and legal expert Rob Crain, thank you so much for coming on the show. We appreciate your insights, sir.
Anytime.